This week's recording corresponds with week four's assignment towards your project. This should be very easy, very straightforward, very short, so hopefully we can make sense of this pretty quickly. All you're going to do is calculate the z-score for an observation or a raw score on your dependent variable. Technically, this variable should be interval ratio, but if yours is ordinal, that's fine. You're going to go through the calculation anyway as though it was interval ratio. You're going to need the mean and standard deviation to calculate the z-score, and you should obtain this information using SPSS. As far as what to submit, your Zoom presentation for this assignment is going to be short. You're going to take your hypothetical students through your z-score calculation and interpret the z-score. You can do it ahead of time and then use the information from your calculation and just talk about it. You don't have to calculate it as you go. If you've calculated it in advance, that's totally fine. You don't need to do an SPSS demonstration to show how you got the mean or standard deviation, but if you choose to do that, that's fine. I'll do it for you just so you can recall how to obtain that information. But like I said, you're not required to do SPSS for this assignment. Just go step by step through the calculation and then interpret the meaning of the z-score in the context of the variable. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I am going to go through SPSS even though you're not required to do it, just so you can recall how to obtain the mean and standard deviation, and then we'll go through the z-score calculation. Okay, so first, we're going to do the dependent variable. So to obtain the mean and standard deviation, and remember my dependent variable is ordinal. If yours is ordinal, that's fine too. It technically should be interval ratio. So attitudes toward capital punishment, that is my dependent variable. Make sure that you are running the analysis for the correct variable. I'm going to go to statistics. Mean and standard deviation are the two pieces of information I need. If you have something else checked, I would recommend unchecking it. You don't have to. You just won't use the information even though SPSS gives it to you. You're going to click continue. You're going to click OK, and then you will have the information you need. The mean for my dependent variable, which is attitudes toward capital punishment, is 2.84. So remember that 3 means moderate, and 4 and 5 meant that respondents were more supportive of capital punishment. So on average, respondents in my sample were pretty close to moderate, but they were slightly opposed to capital punishment. The standard deviation is 1.244. So now that I have that information, I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to save this. And then I am going to go into my z-score calculation. So you need a raw score. Remember, z-scores are for each observation. So for my raw score, I just picked somebody with a value of 1, and you can see that right here. So obviously your raw score needs to be a legitimate score. So I couldn't say, oh, well, my raw score is 8, because 8 wasn't a response option for attitudes toward capital punishment. So a raw score would have to be either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So I just chose 1. If you, let's say that your dependent variable is GPA, your raw score might be a 3.50. And again, that's up to you. It could be a 2.14. You're just doing this to show me that you can calculate a z-score. So I don't care what raw score you choose, just tell me what you choose. So from SPSS, I know that my mean for attitudes for capital punishment is 2.84. I know that my standard deviation is 1.244. I know that the raw score, and this is just what I chose, and you will choose something that's relevant, and as long as it's relevant, whatever you choose is fine. So for me, as long as I chose a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5 for attitudes toward capital punishment, it would be a legitimate raw score. Again, I chose 1. Here's the formula for calculating a z-score. It's z sub x, which is the z-score for somebody with a raw score of 1, equals x, which is the raw score, minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. There is a symbol, and it's x with a bar over it. I couldn't find it. It's there, but it's pretty difficult to find. So I just put mean here. But if you see X minus X bar, which is what you see in your book, it's saying the same thing. It's the observation minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. And then here you see how that is, how that's laid out. So raw score minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. You are free to use a calculator for this. I used a calculator. Here's what I came out with. My z-score now is negative 1.479. So knowing that this is my z-score, so this actually should be z equals, so now that I have calculated my z-score, I need to now interpret that. And what I'm going to say is that z-score provides you with two pieces of information. One is the distance between the mean and your individual raw score. It is a standardized distance. So here I would say that my raw score of 1, or respondents with a raw score of 1, are 1.47, in other words, almost 1.5 units below the mean. And that makes sense because my mean is almost moderate, so somebody who is more opposed would be below the mean. So make sure that your calculation makes sense. So here it does make sense. That someone with a raw score of 1, someone who is opposed to capital punishment, is going to be below my mean. My mean is someone who is pretty close to moderates, very slightly opposed. So I would say that the distance between this raw score and the mean is about 1.5 units. The second piece of information comes from the sign. My sign is negative. So I know that this z-score is less than, someone with a raw score of 1 is less than the mean because the z-score is negative. So on average, or a standard, the distance between the mean and this individual raw score is almost 1.5 units. The raw score is almost 1.5 units, standardized units below the mean. So again, you should know that the number itself represents the distance between the mean and the raw score, and then the sign tells you whether the raw score is greater than or less than the mean. So when you interpret your z-score, make sure that you give both of those pieces of information. I used a Word document to show my calculation. You're not required to use a Word document. You should show me some type of documentation if you want to use a PowerPoint slide. I would prefer that you not handwrite. If you do, I would recommend using a Sharpie and make sure your writing is very clear. Again, you're free to use a calculator to do the actual calculation itself. Just make sure that you show me documentation of your calculation and then interpret it verbally, talking into the Zoom video, interpret your final z-score. I'm not going to save this. I would recommend that you do save it. Just save it as z-score calculation or something, because you're going to need all of this information to put together for your final project. So stop share. I hope that this information helped. Again, this one should be pretty straightforward. Just choose any raw score as long as it's relevant to your dependent variable. Make sure you know the mean and standard deviation. Show me documentation of your calculation. And then make sure you provide two pieces of the interpretation, both the number and the sign. As always, let me know if you have any questions. I hope the video was helpful. And now you are over halfway there with the pieces of your project. So you've got 3 weeks of putting pieces together, and then your final project will be the accumulation of all of the pieces, however you choose to put them together.